G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week. Now you're going to have to bear with me today. I'm on some new medication and I've really hit a wall, but I see my oncologist tomorrow and I'm hoping that I can maybe make a shift off that onto potentially something else. But today we do have a lot to talk about. I need to show you the maps. I need to show you in many different front lines and where there is said to be an unfolding catastrophe happening now. Now, in line with that, I'm going to show you where some fortifications are lying, where the movements are threatening those, but also we need to talk and look at where attacks are happening, of course, based off geolocated footage of where we know there are combats happening at the moment. We need to talk about rhetoric versus reality. We need to talk about what is actually happening and what is likely to happen and where there is a difference and change in that. I said I was going to present this yesterday, so we're going to read through that. And of course, we need to look at the US and Russian relations. As we know, Washington Post yesterday put out that Putin spoke to then Trump. But the Kremlin has hit back through Dmitry Peskov, a Kremlin spokesperson, and said this is a fallacy, that this has never occurred. So we're going to talk about that. We'll look at how that may affect things, and we'll look at what would happen if the US pulled aid out of Ukraine. But where I want to start is I actually want to start on the map. So, of course, here we have Ukraine in the center and, of course, the capital of Kiev. We have the red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. The green is areas where Ukraine has fought back and pushed Russia back. Of course, the red check is areas that Russia has made over the past 24 hours. And Russia has been exponentially increasing the amount of land that it is taking month by month. And I want to show you that in one sec. I've just got one thing in the wrong folder. So if we go into my maps folder here, this is what I want to show you. So we had this on to October the 12th, that by the deep state map from the 1st to the 12th of October, that Russia had occupied about 106 more square kilometres. Now, it is November the 12th. So from the 1st of November to the 12th of November, Russia has gained an extra 261 kilometre squares. This is 146% faster than the same time from October 1st to 12. So you can see this exponential increase too, as we're seeing Russia not only continuing to move, but move faster as well. Will we see this continue in the muddier months, in the colder months? I don't know, but we are going to see and we will find out. But as you can see on this map, you can see where there is a lot of red check occurring here. So look, the first area I want to speak about is Kurakhove front. This is, of course, where there are major defensive works. And as you can see, this Dalny area, a major fortification has come under control in here by the Russian forces and are looking to flank and hit on the side, which is vulnerable of a defensive work that is sitting in, that is sitting in here for Ukraine, that of course is to stop an attack from this direction, but Russia is attacking in this direction. To be fair, Russia is attacking on all directions in here, and we'll see that by the geolocations, and we'll see what Deep State has also said about this. So let's start with our first geolocation that is in this Novoselidivka here. So this is the geolocation. So right just on the edge of the grey zone here in Novoselidivka, and the geolocation is of this flag. If it will load for me, that Russian soldier sticking this out the window, and by the drone footage gives us an idea right on the border here of the grey zone of where that Russian flag has been put up. But let's continue a little bit further and speak about this area as a whole, as it is developing very quickly in here. And not only developing quickly, it's actually increasing in speed also. Now, this is what Syriac is showing. Now, this is dramatically different. Now, what Syriac is saying is not only did Russia gain the rest of Novoselidivska, that Russia also is now occupying this Voznesenkia as well. Now, one of the problems is Russia's moving that quickly. I'm not even being able to learn the towns. Remember, for Osharetne, I could learn how to say that because it took a number of weeks, but there is moving fairly quickly. So as you can see here, that from Ternivska, where of course we saw some geolocations, all the way through past this train line, that Russia is closing up this area. So let's just draw this in really rough. Somewhat along like this is what then Syriac maps is showing, and that is what he's saying, at least where that front line is sitting. Now let's just move. We'll remain speaking about this front in here. This map is glitching out on me, I apologize. So we'll move down Kurakhove, Dalny area. So let's open up the Syriac map. Now what it is showing is that Russia is making more ground into Kurakhove itself, out from this red dot, which is here, which is Ostrivsky, but also making more ground into Dalny as well. But what I wanted to show, the most important element of this, is these black lines in here. These show the Ukrainian defensive works. Now, as you can see, this initial defensive work was to stop an east to west attack. Russia came north to south, and that fell very quickly. It's looking like this second one here is going to come under control. If it hasn't, at least by Deep State's map, it's looking like this second one may have. But what we're saying is these ones in here, this is to stop a south to north assault. But it's looking like Russia will come from east to west, that will reduce the effectiveness of this, so that they are increasing support. And you can see they're increasing ground by both maps, although it might be slightly different. We know it's in these directions that Russia is having a sweep across Kurakhove. Now, let's look at something that is will become more clear tomorrow, but is a big change in here. So, Noel reports is showing that Russia has made a large amount of ground from Dalny and down to Ternivska around in here. But also he's pointing out that the Ternivska dam, which sits then right in here, has been destroyed as well. Now, people will ask, who destroyed this? Well, it is most likely the then withdrawing forces. It will most likely be the Ukrainian forces who have destroyed this dam. I couldn't see this being in Russia's interest at this point in time. It's like destroying the bridges that fall back across from the east side of Chasiv Yar to the west. We know it was Ukrainian drones hitting those, because Russia, of course, wanted to use that to move across. So it was most likely Ukraine then has destroyed that dam to try and halt the Russian advancement in here. And this is what then Deep State is saying about the entire situation on this front line. Ignore this for now. We're talking about this salient that is really between Zoroya and Maximivkia as well. So Deep State say, and this is Rob Lee has just shared exactly what Deep State has. It was just the easiest way to see this all in one slide. The enemy continues to carry their large-scale plan to encircle the city from the flanks. The city he's talking about is Kurakhove. As previously stated, the Russians, mounting greater pressure on new directions, are attempting to reach logistics paths of the Ukrainian Defence Forces, and this process is only gaining momentum. The Muscovites currently attacking Ukrainian military positions from the north, south, and east, which we can see where those movements are. The goal is to bypass the city from the flanks and control the N15 Zap-Donetsk route. So, of course, this route that is running through here, this is what we have been saying for an amount of time. Russia to attack Kurakhove, east to west, it is very defended. But what they can do is, if they're somewhere in here, that push across in here somewhere, fire control into Kurakhove across from north to south. We know there's massive Ukrainian defensive works sitting in here, and have some sort of sweep around. This is very likely why Ukraine, I believe Ukraine, has destroyed this dam in here to try and stop this flank maneuver, or at least halt the flank maneuver that Russia is trying to do. So if we add up what is most likely, I believe that is what is most likely, but also trying to take control of course, this N15 route in here around from some direction to stop the logistics into this area. And other bloggers have said that we will see, if we see that cut off, this whole salient in here fall very quickly, all the way down through Ilinikia and Ternivska as well. Let's continue on this. The goal is to bypass. At the same time, the unfavourable situation developed in the vicinity of the settlements of Ternivska, Ternivska, that exact area down in here that we spoke about, trying to gain control and cut that off, at least strategically cut it off. We must reiterate that lies will ruin us all. Yet even in attracting greater resources to the vicinity of Kurakhove, concerns remain about the reasoning behind the deployment. So this idea of there is reality and what is being said as far as lies. And this is something I've talked about. I think so much of the propaganda of Russia is losing, they can't mount tanks, they have attacks, they have no tanks, they've got no this, got no that. Those lies, that pure blatant disinformation propaganda, then can affect even command decisions of why would we need more guys in here if this is going fine, as we're seeing that collapse. And one thing I will say in this, if there is 10 to 20,000 highly trained forces, potentially Ukraine's best trained forces, up occupying a part of Russia in Kursk, which I see is unfavourable territory and I see is not significant compared to here, you'd think there could be some level of redeployment down into here. Anyway, take into account the enemy's activity. It is only a matter of time before Kurakhove is lost. And if we still do not take control of the problem with the flanks, it will quickly turn into another catastrophe. This is what we hear and see on the maps more every time. The flanks are left unprotected, that Russia is able to envelop something on the flanks, Ukraine strategically withdraw, and Russia strategically encircle, Ukraine have to withdraw, some forces left, and Russia takes the area. Seledov, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Ukrainsk, anywhere you want to talk about. And this is exactly, again, for the 10th time or more, exactly what I believe that we are seeing in Kurakhove right now. Same thing happening again on the flanks, and the missing certain areas and not willing to accept some of that happening and say there are problems and fixing that, but more focused on just pushing out propaganda can affect command decisions, deployment decisions, all of this, and we're seeing this fall. I cannot believe, with the amount of ground exponentially increasing, strategically, tactically important ground in the southeast, that we still see a large contingent in the 10 to 20,000 range with the best tanks and equipment in Kursk. I cannot believe that equipment and men are still up there not trying to stabilise this. Significantly more important. I can't believe we are still seeing that. The only reason I expect some of that is up there is potentially it can't get withdrawn out of there across the border with Russia's ISR. Otherwise, I can't believe it wouldn't be moved down to here. Maybe it can't actually be withdrawn. So let's talk about Seledov, the areas we see here coming under red check. This is lining up fairly closely with now what Syriac maps is showing in Novoselivska in the direction of Ukrainka as well. So more push to this Pushkani, as well as Russia increases its buffer zone out from Seledov. Now, before we move up into Kursk, which is some of the most interesting updates, let's come down and see where there is a large amount of red check into Makarivka. Remember, Surik said, right where my cursor is right about here, that was where Russia had forces and took ground the other day. Let's measure this up to Rivnopol, is some 3.5 kilometers. That is a very long way. Remember, this offensive through here, that was the best morale, the best weapons, the best training, took maybe 7 kilometers. And we've seen Russia turn back 3.5 kilometers of that today. This is major, and I can't believe that the amount of resources and men are in another area that I see as tactically and strategically insignificant, not in very significant areas like this. In behind that defensive line, develops and goes downhill very quickly. Anyway, let's have a look at Deep State map. This is exactly the area, but it's not showing the advances of today. But the enemy became more active near Makarivka, this area. It's a difficult day for the units of the defence force of Ukraine near Makarivka and Rivnopol. Of course, Rivnopol going at least majority under occupation. Russians carry out assault operations with forces of up to 50 to 60 soldiers at a time, as well as with the support of other units on motorcycles, I believe, as well. The enemy's goal is to gain a greater foothold in Rivnopol and Makarivka. If the plus-minus situation is clear of late, the situation in Rivnopol is still unknown. But this was before their map update today, which is confirming the situation is under occupation with those large amount, 50 to 60, so 2 platoon sizes, at least from my world, that'd be a 2-platoon attack into here and making further ground. So let's keep pushing our way up, and we do see some change around Nepelivkia, Toretsk area, some red check popping up in here. We do have a slight update from Syriac maps in here. Situation Toretsk front line during the first days, November. Front line inside the city hasn't changed significantly with the back and forth Ukrainian-Russian army. This isn't surprising at all. Knowing the density of areas in here, I'm not surprised back and forth and a hell of a lot of fighting occurring in there, but some changes at least shown on the deep state Ukrainian map. Let's come up the Pishani front and we see near Veshnevy out to the south that Russia gained some further territory. Now this is the Pishani front, but this whole area I'm calling that. But right here near Kolesnivka as well, that Syriac is showing. Now the easiest way is just to see where these tree lines are and the train line running through here, that it is saying that Russia is all the way up through Kolesnivka as well along this train line. You can see where these trees are to try and line that up, expanding that bridgehead to the west of Bishani. But where we'll push to next is, of course, Kursk Suja front. Now, if we go back yesterday, we can see this is what it looked like, and then this is what it's looking like today. So Russia did decrease the amount of control that Ukraine have in this sector. Now, we do have some geolocations in here. Again, I want to show you where that has moved. I wish that it would show where the original front line was, all the way out near Korenovo, even bordering Snagost beyond 2, and show how much ground was taken back. We know Russia has taken back about 50% of this, but let's have a look at where some of these attacks are. So I have some geolocation stuff. Also, I can't show you too much of this, but again, it will be on the Telegram if you'd like to see. So there are Russian infantry and Ukrainian infantry fighting amongst these chicken coops. And here the Russian infantry do look like they have success and using drones and clearing that area as well. But what I always say is footage like this is always cut up to show one way or another. Remember, we see footage all the time going failed assault, and then we see the border moving. Well, it mustn't have been that failed. But what the Russian page, I got this off, said, storm in the chicken coop. Northerners destroy infantry of the armed forces of Ukraine in the village of Darino. In the settlement of Darino, the Ukrainian armed forces militants decided to blend in with the crowd and took refuge in chicken coop. The intelligence of the server group had worked to identify the Ukrainian armed forces servicemen along the chickens and roosters and destroy them with an FPV drone. After the assault aircraft cleared the area and continued the offensive. So one thing we do see in that footage, again, you can see it on the Telegram if you'd like, is that the Russian infantry is working in conjunction with those FPV drones. The FPV drones strike the Ukrainian forces and then the Russian infantry move through. But I'm more interested in, one, the use of these, but also where this took place. So Darino, right about where my cursor is, where I've put this dot. So they are working then behind where the line was previously. So if we take it of this is where it was the day before, let's say it's right here, some 2 kilometers of advancement. That is what I've seen Russian pages claiming today. This in here, of course, we spoke about yesterday. Ukraine saying there's going to be a major Russian assault in here, but I think there's going to be maybe a major Russian assault. We are seeing further increased assaults, but I think we may see a large Ukrainian withdrawal if that can happen at that point. Anyway, we have one more change in here that isn't shown. Now, again, I can't show you this footage. There are large losses in it, but this is the geolocation. So we have Pokrovsk. We have then this waterway in here. I forgot what it is called off the top of my head. I apologize. But let's go from here to here, about 2 kilometers behind the line. What we see is, I think I can show you just the very beginning of this footage. We see then Russians on like an inflatable boat here, rowing across. Then they get seen by ISR drones, targeted by drones, and have many losses as well. But other pages are saying that Russia was able to increase their control that 2 kilometers in this direction too. Maybe they're resupplying units dug in here. Maybe that is the forward reconnaissance element. We are unsure, but we'll wait and see. But we do know a couple of Ks on both sides. There are at least presence of Russian forces. There's presence here that is grey zone. The biggest threat in here is that Russia somehow cut off the Ukrainians in this territory. Remember, getting cut off is a large problem with overextending lines. Russia could have the same problem if they overextend down the south and east. I think that's why we're seeing this grind forward, take an area, move the flanks, take that, and not trying to overextend by much more than 1 kilometer or 2 at a time. So we will see about here, and we'll see if Ukraine could withdraw or if they stay and fight. If there is a force of 50 to 60,000 Russians in here, I just don't know how tactically, strategically, the best decision will be to stay and fight or tie up those 60,000 soldiers here, withdraw and go into those south and eastern areas of Ukraine that are collapsing exponentially at the moment. So before we talk about rhetoric and reality, let's talk about this. Of course, what we reported on yesterday by Washington Post, that there was a phone call between Putin and Trump. Anyway, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has said this absolutely does not correspond to reality, that it was pure fiction. And this is what RT is reporting. President Vladimir Putin did not have a phone conversation with about the Ukraine conflict, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said. The Washington Post claimed on Sunday that Trump called Putin after winning term as US president to discuss his vision regarding how the Ukrainian crisis could be deflated. Peskov said on Monday that the article was a vivid example of the quality of information published by even some respectable outlets. This absolutely does not correspond to reality. This is pure fiction. This information is simply false. Kyiv previously denied the claim made by the Washington Post in its piece that the Ukrainian government was informed about the phone call beforehand and gave its consent to the US-Russian engagement. This is from Reuters on Sunday. Reports the Ukrainian side was informed in advance of the alleged phone calls are false. Trump, of course, has said that he could end this very quickly and bring the war to an end with some level of compromise. Now, there's a few ways this could be. One, the sources that Washington Post are using are bullshitting, or they're not very aware about what has occurred. Could also be that there was a phone call, but it had nothing to do with Ukraine, which I guess it could be. I don't know why Putin and Trump would be ringing if that wouldn't come up in conversation. There would be one very large elephant in the room. But again, another thing I say here is maybe this is propaganda. Maybe that phone call did happen, and the Kremlin are denying it to create some doubt or division amongst Trump's voters. So what I'm saying is this, is one thing the Kremlin wants in the West is division. I don't really think the Kremlin care if it's right or left. I think they would see that liberalism causes more division, left, neoliberalism, so wokeism will create more internal division potentially, but also division from other more conservative states in Asia, Middle East. So there won't be more Western cohesion across and work with those states. Potentially, we saw Mao really say that it was more left that was easier to influence. But I think more so than any pushing right or left, they want division. And what I'm saying here is maybe this did happen, but to undermine Trump a little bit, maybe to undermine the Washington Post, the Western media per se, that it's like, this never happened, what are you guys on about? Because, of course, this has been picked up now too. And maybe Putin may be like not willing to come to a deal, and by not coming to a deal, he could undermine Trump, because Trump's only saying I could end this very quickly. If Putin's not willing to come to the table, he says, no, could that really undermine the promises that Trump has been giving to his own voter base, and people then questioning that doubt, maybe division there too? Remember, Putin has a hell of a lot of influence in the Middle East with, of course, the funding and support to Iran that then funds and supports the H guys operating in areas where America has a lot of interest and arms also. So could we see that as a source of undermining Trump coming in? Everyone celebrated that. They're like, oh, Trump and Putin. I do not think the Kremlin's happy about Trump getting in. I think they would have preferred Kamala with the predictability and the way the tide of the war is moving under her administration already. The Washington Post reported the phone call between Trump and Putin based on accounts by familiar with the matter who spoke of condition of anonymity. Now, of course, it could just be these sources bullshitting, or maybe there is some level of play here to undermine the president-elect coming in. We don't really know. We'll find out. We'll see what Trump says at some point. Tatarigami has said this: if certain Western influencers and politicians claim they want to end the war by simply freezing it, they're being dishonest. Without US support, the war wouldn't end automatically. It would become much more difficult for Ukraine. They are advocating for Russia, not peace. Now, this is something we see a lot of, that if you're not in full support of Ukraine, that you are advocating for Russia. I don't agree with that. Some people have different opinions. People go to the polls and people look online and go, I just want my gas to be cheaper and people not to be dying, not this, therefore I'm hanging a red, white and blue flag. So yeah, I don't think you can just put people in that one basket. But I do agree that it would not automatically end. There could be other militias, there could be localized fighting. Maybe Ukraine would choose not to stop fighting. But in my opinion, if Ukraine does choose to continue fighting without US support, we know that Europe cannot backfill that support, because Europe for too long milked cheap Russian energy for their own ambitions of nuclear power and fucking riding push bikes, and American military security. They milked those two for too long. Therefore, their industrial base cannot backfill if the US pull out. That it wouldn't just become more difficult for Ukraine. I believe then it would become a suicide mission. Ukraine is already in a difficult position with billions of dollars going into Ukraine from America every month. If the US pulled that out, it would go from being difficult where Ukraine is then objectively losing in the south and the east and in other areas to, I believe, a suicide mission from there and the potential to lose more than maybe a negotiated deal and diplomatic settlements down the line. Another thing I say in this, imagine if the US did announce they're pulling out. Ukraine already has a morale crisis and desertion problem on the front line. Imagine how this would be further exacerbated if the US withdraws, that people would be going, I'm not fucking signing up if the US isn't doing this. If it's going to get even more difficult than the already incredibly difficult situation that it is now. So I believe if the US pulls out, Ukraine has to make some deal. I can't see that going forward. Maybe I will be wrong. We will see. But even if that does occur, I still think there will be some of these ideological militias or just very passionate militias who are, there are both of, who may continue fighting, but that can become a big problem. Also, remember, at the end of major wars, the war can just be shifted into proxy in other areas. I think Ukraine will still then fight Russia no matter where the border falls or where the guns fall on in other areas, potentially in Africa. Now, I said to you that a friend of mine had a breakdown of some ideas and he was chatting back and forth, trying to be more and more critical with AI to assess articles and see what the consistencies are amongst lots of media. And I wanted to share that with you today because I believe this is very interesting. But I spent about 30 minutes to help Perplexity AI cut through some of the emotions and propaganda surrounding Ukraine. The reality check. Russia's one consistent goal was blocking Ukraine's NATO membership. While they lack power to eliminate Ukraine, they can keep this pressure point. So, of course, that consistency of not wanting Ukraine in NATO. And the real existential threat isn't to Ukraine as a nation, it's to leaders who have promised the impossible. When rhetoric meets reality, truth emerges. Ukraine will survive. Of course, what I've said is Ukraine is the Ukrainians. It's not the government. It's not the land. It is the Ukrainians. So that will survive. But outside NATO, the conflict continues because accepting this threatens political survival, not national existence. That if the border was changed somewhere, that politically it would be really undermined because it has based that the survival here, the rhetoric is on NATO membership. Anyway, it also pushed back, and he has spoken about, and this is something from himself, but being included in this, something very interesting. Now, I don't believe this will happen, but something to just think about and mull over in bed tonight. Just thinking about me. Trump could solve Ukrainian military manpower problems by sending the millions of military-aged illegal aliens in the US to Ukraine under a similar scheme as the Russians. So as you know, Russia will recruit and have you can have some level of citizenship, residency, blah, 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 from other nations helping manpower problems. Imagine if the US did something similar into Ukraine. Now, I said, I think this is wild. I don't really think that will happen, but it's something to think over. And I asked, what if you saw this, what do you think? He said, I think the aliens have a choice to go back to their country. We know Trump has said that he will deport millions, or go fight for democracy or defending Europe, as we are so often lectured about. Just think how all those illegals would change those village demographics. I bet the scream about ruining the Ukrainian culture from the leftists would be deafening, although it is silent on the other side of that if someone would bring that up about America. But could we see something like that? Like if you want to stay in the West, you can either go back to your country, which is XYZ, or you can stay in the West, so to speak, but you have to go fight for democracy and defending the West over here. Could that fix that manpower problem? That is a wild thought, but again, we'll bring everything to the table because we have no idea where this is going to go. So these are the key points that AI has pumped out of all these articles it has been absorbing, and my mate really trying to get it down to see, no, not what are you saying about this, because it kept saying a million Russians have died. And it's like, no, be critical. What actually are the articles saying and what evidence are they supplying? So this is what it has come down to, the reality check. What is consistent? Russia's maintained one consistent position. They've never had a really consistent position on exactly where that territory is, from the complete taking of Ukraine to these areas or whatever. It hasn't been as consistent as the opposition to Ukraine joining NATO. That is completely consistent. They say Russia lacks the military capability to eliminate Ukraine as a nation. Yet, Russia has sufficient power to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. So they don't have enough to take it as a whole, but they do have enough to stop Ukraine from joining NATO. Their one consistency. The war continues despite Russia's inability to achieve its maximalist stated goals. Again, stated goals aren't that clear, but the one consistent one is then, of course, NATO, but not take of Kyiv or other areas. Power dynamic. Ukrainian leadership has tied their political future to NATO membership. Western leaders know membership is not realistic while conflict continues. That it's not. While the conflict is on, membership is not on the table. Russia maintains enough military pressure to ensure the conflict continues. Even if it were to really die back, if there is some level of conflict, the Western leaders know that membership is not going to be on the table. This creates an existential threat specifically to the current Ukrainian leadership's position. Of course, what it has said back in number 1 here is that the leaders have had this promise on the rhetoric of joining NATO, and that is the existential threat to the politics here rather than the existence of the state. That is a very interesting thing. So practical outcomes, as it sees, mixed with himself. Ukraine will continue to exist as a nation, saying back in that Russia does not have the power to completely stop that happening. But it will likely remain outside of NATO because it believes Russia still has enough power to then, how does it actually word this? Sufficient power for preventing Ukraine from joining NATO. Current Ukrainian leadership faces a loss of power if they accept this reality. Remember, they have sort of banked on being into NATO. That has been the promise put forward, nothing but that security guarantee of NATO. The conflict persists partly because accepting this outcome threatens their position, and it does threaten the position of those leaders if NATO security guarantees, whatever, is not on the table. And I will go even furthermore and say the promise of Crimea, Donetsk, whatever, is why I believe there could be a lot of unrest also, because where the promises are and what the actual practical outcomes, what is looking like the reality versus rhetoric on the ground, is not looking like it's the same thing at the moment. There is idealistic goals and there are realistic goals and how it is looking like at the moment. Is Ukraine going to recover Crimea, Sevastopol, Donetsk, Luhansk at the moment, with Russia moving on the battlefield, Russia having stronger defences and at the moment a larger industrial base of artillery shells coming from its allies also, as well as higher recruiting numbers? It is at this point in time a very idealistic thing to say Ukraine's going to have military success back against this and join NATO. Is it idealist to say Russia is going to take all of is it realistic to say they're going to take all of this back and Ukraine will not exist as a state? No, I don't believe that is either, like it says it's maximalist goals. Is it realistic to say Russia still has the power, even if they really pulled back operations defensively, to maintain enough pressure to not join NATO? I also would agree with that. So that is very, very interesting to see how it has broken down with those sources as well. And it gave like 50 sources from all these Western media outlets and what actually is consistent. But he did say that every time the AI did try and push more of a left narrative onto things, or a narrative of a million dead, or this, or that. So again, with all of this, we're going to find out in an amount of time. If I make it, I'll find out, but you guys are going to find out. So you guys have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.